list of
Hello.
people who are registered with them on their thing. We are still having some technical glitches because Trisha is not being able to
Microphone.
join us. I mean, she's trying to locate her microphone, but I'm sure she will in the next few
Advanced.
minutes. So friends, let me take this time to introduce the session for today. See, today's
Studio
session
audio.
is
Maybe now.
on Deepankar Aron's absolutely wonderful book, which is tracing the journey of Buddha, and he's moving east, whereas the earlier classic from which he's taken his name was the sages and the saints coming to the west to learn about Buddhism from India. This is a take where he is retracing the steps and going back to the East Asian region to see how it has happened. So, Dipankar, let me first start by congratulating you for this absolutely wonderful book. And in fact, in this congratulations, both you and Trisha deserve our acknowledgement and appreciation for having produced such a lovely, readable text where the text and the illustrations have been put together so well that it's really a wonderful arrangement and very pleasing to the eye. And therefore, because even if the content is very good, the way the content is displayed, that really adds up to the quality of reading. So let me congratulate you and Trisha on that. And let me start by asking you, Dipankar, there are many ways of looking at time. Corporates look at quarterly results. You and I are in government departments, so our bosses ask for annual budgets and to say how much have you spent annually. In our lifetime, we look at decades because we say that we spent 6 decades, 3 decades in the government as we're superannuating out 6 decades. So corporates look at time and in quarters. We look at times in governments and years, and sometimes individuals look at it in terms of decades. Nation states and institutions look at it in terms of centuries. But civilizations have to look at time across millennia. And it is in this context of looking at time across millennia that I want to ask you this question about how do you look at the relationships between the two great Indic civilizations? I mean, the connect between India and China on the one hand, and the connect between Hinduism and Buddhism on the other. So let's have your first thoughts on this subject.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, I would like to place on record my greatest appreciation and thanks to you, sir, to Value of Words, to Civil Services Officers Institute, and to Business World, and of course to Niyogi Books, without whom we wouldn't have been here on the subject. The question you've asked is indeed, the book is about timelessness of the cultural, religious, philosophical, artistic linkages that bind India to the East Asian region. And of course, China being a major neighbor, the flow of Buddhism along with trade and concomitant art architecture happened along the Silk Route, and then it went beyond to Korea, to Japan, and then to Mongolia as well. If one looks at the history, we are talking of, in this book, 2,200 years plus of history. So you see the story, as you rightly said, is not confined insofar as international relations are concerned, relations between civilizations are concerned, not to a year or a decade or a century. We are talking of 2.2 million thousand years. Now, it begins with the story in Luoyang, where the Chinese emperor of the Eastern Han dynasty called Ming sees a beautiful dream of an angel, a golden angel, and he summons his ministers the next morning as if they would know what his dream was. But they say, yes, your lordship, yes, excellency, we know of this Buddha in the West. So he says, please get me some more information. Mm-hmm. So lo and behold, the Chinese envoys, they rush to the northwestern part of India. Actually, it was a Yuezhi court in Fargana, as Dr. Lokesh Chanda writes in the foreword to the book. And there these Indian scholars, monks called Dhanratna and Kassapa Matanga are there, eminent Buddhist scholars, and they agree to come along with the Chinese envoys, accept the invite. And so there's a beautiful painting, in the Luoyang temple even today, which depicts these two monks coming on top of a white horse with the statue and idol of Buddha, with sutras with them. They are the guests of the Chinese emperor, and they stay in the guest house for a year until the Chinese emperor builds this beautiful temple, which exists even today, of course, in its modern avatar, and that is called the Temple of White Horse, or Bai Ma Sa in Chinese. So their tomes, they then translated the sutras there from Sanskrit into Chinese. They were revered in China, even today. And their tomes are there, and their images are etched on stone, on paper, on cloth. You can see them everywhere. Little children will come and touch, their feet in obeisance and reverence. So starting from there, whether we look at the Shaolin temple where monks like Bodhidharma, another monk called Batuo, whose Indian name is in fact forgotten, records are not available. But Bodhidharma is of course famous from Kanchipuram. He went there and meditated for 9 years. And some even, there's a story in Chinese folklore that, the Chinese tea originated because once while meditating, he kind of fell asleep or something. Disgusted with himself, he cut off his eyelids and then started drinking tea so that he may never fall asleep and maybe in the state of wakefulness. So he introduced Kalari Paitu, the famous South Indian martial arts, as they say, which has blossomed in the Shaolin temple. We all know it's the famous Kung Fu. In fact, the Shaolin monks played a key role in political empires turning and twisting. The Tang dynasty, for example, the most famous dynasty of China, which ruled for almost 3 centuries from 7th to 10th, was set up by overthrowing the Sui dynasty with the help of Shaolin monks. So they were patronized heavily by the state. And then again, as we descend down the first millennia towards the end, we have Song dynasty. And the word chini in India, the sugar, you see, chini is not original to India.
Just if you recall, we've discussed this at some length. Yes,
Yes.
good. Now, but although this was not scheduled as this question that I'm going to ask you was not the second question that I had to ask you, but you did make a mention about the state patronage to Buddhism in China, which brings me to a larger philosophical question: that can any religion go on for a long period of time without state patronage? Is it possible? Is it practical? Is it doable?
I think invariably state support, if we see even in the Indian milieu, you see Ashoka was a great advocate of Buddhism, and famously he sent the relics of Buddha. They say some 60,000 plus relics were sent by him, including to places in China. In fact, in Xi'an, there's a pagoda which was originally called the Ashokan Pagoda, and today it's called Faminsa. I write about this in the book. Then again, there's a place called Wutaishan, in China, where Mao Zedong, before taking over as the Communist Party leader in the People's Republic of China in 1949, just before that he goes and pays obeisance, and there the Ashoka's relics had gone. So I think the answer to that question, I would say the state patronage plays certainly a very key role in propagation of religion. But eventually, you see, the religion and the spirituality and the message of enlightenment or of attaining a slightly higher philosophical thought than just the materialistic world, I think that has to sustain. Otherwise, it cannot, beyond a point, sustain itself. But certainly, in terms of geographic expanse and vastness and spreading of the thought, it does play a role. And it's also important to realize that all religions at the end of the day talk the same thing. You see, the core philosophy. So state patronage does aid and abet.
Well, on the other part, we'll have a discussion later, because I think there is a essential difference between the Indic and the Judaic religions, especially in the way we look at several things, including the way we relate to the plant and the animal kingdom. But that at a later point. Somewhere along the line, you have written that what you've done is travelogue and not history. So can you not share with our listeners today, because a lot of young volunteers are listening, what is the difference between history and travelogue? And you, of course, made it very clear this is a travelogue from which you can derive a lot of historical facts. But let me have your thoughts on this. And while you are at this, I just want to know whether Trisha is being able to listen to us, and whether we can listen to her, so that the course of conversation will depend on whether Trisha is being able to communicate with us.
Yes,
Trisha?
I can hear all of you now.
Okay,
Can
great.
you all hear me?
Great. And we can also hear you. So then we'll move on. Okay, Deepankar, you respond to this question, then I'll have a question for Trisha, and then we'll move on. Right?
I lost you for a second.
Yes.
Since I lost you for a second, you said it's about travel and not so much of history. Is that right?
No, I said that you have yourself mentioned that your book is a travelogue And then you've also gone along to explain the difference between history and travelogue. So
Right.
I want you to elaborate on this.
So you see, sir, the idea of this book was not really born from the word go. The travels are spread over a period of 11 years. So it began like travel writing, which I've been doing for the last 2 decades. And as I started moving in the East Asian region, starting with the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra in Tibet in 2009 as the liaison officer for MEA, and then during the course of my travels, while I was posted as a consul in Hong Kong, I had the opportunity on a personal as well as official plane to see the area from close quarters. And a pattern started emerging, just like you join the pieces of a puzzle and you start seeing the bigger picture, which is bigger than the sum total of its parts. And that bigger picture, to just give one example, the trigger was, you see, there is a beautiful, about 35-meter high bronze statue of Buddha in Hong Kong, right? It's called the Tian Tian Buddha next to the airport. Now, when I went to that place, I realized that this was commissioned as late as 1997. It's a modern work, and just about the time when Hong Kong was switching back to China. And it was inspired by a beautiful bronze statue of 13th century in Japan called the Daibutsu. Dai means big and Butsu means Buddha, Daibutsu of Kamakura. And Kamakura was, one of the capitals of shoguns of Japan.
Yes.
The generals had their own capital, and the emperor had its capital in Kyoto. And not only that, it was also inspired by the gigantic and the world's highest Buddha existing today, the natural rock-cut Buddha called the Dafo in Sichuan province of China, which is something like 270 feet high at the confluence of 3 rivers. So the travelogues which I was writing, I started seeing this beautiful, gigantic, deep, vast, rich interconnectedness on not just a religious plane or a cultural plane or a plane of art. You see these grottos in Dunhuang in western part of China, in Gansu, or in Longman grottos in northeast part of China, or Yungang grottos have so much of resemblance, say, with Ajanta Aurora or the Alchi caves in Ladakh, in Leh, near Leh. So this beautiful pattern started emerging, and that is where in 2015, 6 years after my travels had begun, only one travel which I undertook after this thought came into my mind was done with the idea of book in mind, you see, at the nascent stage. And therefore, weaving these travelogues, and obviously these places are these are of historical significance, where so much flourished, so much which is so relevant even today. And that's how the book is a combination. It's essentially a travelogue, but interspersed with pieces of history, which is alive and before us to be seen and admired in its various hues and colors.
So great. So what you're saying is that, history is also, that travelogue is also history, so that you can understand. In fact, that's also the modern interpretation of history, that history is not just what is taught in the text in school or college. It's also about, about reading, it's about food, it's about music, it's about so many other things. Trisha, thank you for joining us, but, I don't know whether you heard it or not, but at the very beginning, I said that this text was great, but the text became greater because of the lovely production of the book and the fact that you were able to get the illustration and the text together so seamlessly, and it became a wonderful presentation. So first of all, our compliments to you for having given us this great book, and your thoughts on how do you get this text and this how do you get the text, context, and illustrations together? What is the secret behind Niyogi, producing such lovely books of art?
First of all, thank you very much for actually going through the book and reading it and giving us so many compliments. But the credit completely goes to the author for having a large corpus of photos to choose from, and then the beautiful text and everything, which flows beautifully as stories in different forms. Now, when we talk about illustrated books, there's a reason why we specialize, why we are able to actually do well with our illustrated books. It's because we focus on 50% text and 50% illustrations. Now, this book has around 70,000 words. Most fictions are around 60,000 words or something like that, but it has around 350 pictures. Now, the challenge is to place the photographs in such a way that they highlight the story which comes along. So as we know, visuals, 90%, I've actually written down, people actually retain 80% of what we see, 20% of what we read, and 10% of what we hear. That's just research which has come out. So what we do is to increase the recall value of the stories which is mentioned in a text. Now, only a story alone, only a picture alone cannot tell the entire story. And that's why we need the text. But without the text, the images will also not support what we have. So the uniqueness of the book is that they're put together in such a way that you can actually read the text and see the picture simultaneously. That way we retain a lot more. Anybody who wants to go forward and actually travel with the book can very easily do that. So yes, keeping that in mind, that is how we have structured this book. We've innovated with the size of the book. We wanted to keep it portable. Now that's a challenge because it has to have all the pictures in it and it must come out also. At the same time, we thought people must be able to carry this book. Because when they go out, when they travel, when they trace the trail, they should be able to connect. They should be able to connect with what has been written. And that's what is perhaps making...
One more thing, even the weight of the book has to be kept in mind. It is something that, you know, you can easily pass around, because I've got some comfortable books which are so heavy that, you know, you require assistance to carry them around and to pass them around. So I think on all these counts, Niyogi, you've done very well. Would you have any questions for Deepankar, or should we continue? Should I continue my discussion with him and then I can get back to you?
I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. So whenever you feel it's
you asked Deepankar a few questions. I'll sit my tea while you ask him some questions. Right.
I have two questions that I'll ask, and which will further elucidate because there were several reasons why we chose to publish the book. So I want to get it from the author itself, because I know he knows the entire thing. So I want him to answer it rather than me telling it. So basically, Deepankar, I have two questions for you to begin with. First one is, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Trisha. I can. Yes, please.
First one is, what was your inspiration? If you have covered it, please let me know. I couldn't hear the first 10 minutes. What was your inspiration about the in writing this book? Of course, it was not conceived as a book. It came in later. But what was the inspiration?
So thank you, Trisha, for asking this. The inspiration was simply the enormity of this vastness, depthness of the cultural, philosophical, religious, artistic linkages, you know, which bind India to the East Asian civilizations of China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Mongolia. In an era, if you look at last 2,200 years, all the advances in communication, transportation, language, instant communication, what you see, mobiles, WhatsApps and aeroplanes, all these were absent for 99% of this time. And yet you had thousands of monks traveling from India to China, even to Japan. You know, there was an Indian monk consecrating the Buddha of Nara in around 775 AD at the invite of the Japanese emperor. So this profundity of this tremendous exchange, I think, was my inspiration. And though we have been taught about this in history books that, you know, Buddhism emanated from India, went out, but the extent, and which is visible to be even today in the course of these travels, I started seeing. There's some disturbance. 250, 270 feet high Buddha of Sichuan Dafo was built over a period of 90 years. And that brings me back to what Dr. Sanjeev Chopra mentioned, the timelessness of it. You know, for the architect to envisage the project and see probably his fourth generation fulfilling it. And this is just one example. You know, then there are so many examples to be. So in a sense, the inspiration is the message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the ancient Indian adage of the whole world is one family. And you see, the Buddhism philosophy and also Vedanta in Hinduism is about this concept of oneness, about empathizing with everybody, not just all human beings on the planet, but even the flora and the fauna. And the fact that this is a very democratic and egalitarian religion and philosophy, you see, cutting across the barriers of caste, creed, language, I would say nationalities, provinces, each and every person, as the Buddha said, can attain enlightenment, can it become a Buddha. He said, don't worship me. Just don't do it. I mean, it's a different story 600 years down the line, inspired by the Gandhara art. You saw the Buddha started coming up with the Greek hair on the top. But you see, that is the core philosophy, which is identical to Vedanta. I think this is the inspiration behind the book. And the inspiration behind the title is what Dr. Sanjeev Chopra mentioned. You see, Journey to the West was a fictionalized account of the actual travelogues of Huan Shan, as we call him in India, Zhuangzang, as we call him in China. And he wrote his compilation in the form of dictation to his disciples. And that is called as Records of the Western Regions. These travels were between 628 to 645 AD, right? And about close to 800 years later in 16th century, when you had the Mings ruling China, a gentleman by the name of Wu Chenggen writes a fictionalized account of this journey. It's called Journey to the West. So you have a character resembling Zhuangzang. You've got a monkey, a Sun Wukong. And that monkey is much like our Hanuman, you see. The similarities are endless. And there's a pig and there's a buffalo and so on. And they help him in undertaking the very arduous journey. So you see, despite whatever geographical boundaries, cultural differences, so as to say, which one might expect between nations, still all this commingling happened. So that's
now that we were on Hanumans and monkeys, and you have the tale of the three monkeys associated very closely with Mahatma Gandhi. See no evil. Can you tell us a story about this, because that does find a reference in your book, so you could enlighten the listeners about that as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. In fact, the three monkeys of which we famously all know as Gandhiji's three monkeys is actually a very Buddhist concept and philosophy. You see, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. I would say speak the right thoughts, hear the right thoughts, think the right thoughts. So that's part of the eightfold path of Buddhism, right? Right conduct, right speech, right action. So these three monkeys were visible in a place in Japan. It's called the temple of in Nikko. It's a Buddhist temple, and there I saw these monkeys, and this was built during around 16th, 15th century. And Nikko was again a capital of one of the shoguns. Shoguns had their own dynasties. So this was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the founder of this shogun dynasty. And there I saw these three monkeys, and that left me puzzling. I thought these were Gandhi's monkeys. Well, as Dr. Padma Bhushan Lokesh Chandra writes, a Japanese scholar monk, Fuji-san, mentioned this to Gandhiji. And then Gandhiji asked Professor Lokesh Chandra's father, that what does it mean? Because he was again a great scholar of Buddhism as well as Indic studies. And he said they're auspicious in Hindu mythology. And the rest is history. The Gandhiji adopted three monkeys as the emblem of non-violence.
Yes, I think now this is more known as Gandhiji's three, the three monkeys of Gandhiji than of anybody else. Okay, now another related question, Deepankar, is that, we did mention, you did mention about that all religions have the same philosophy and the same thing. But, one thing is that in the Indic religion, we relate very easily with the plant and the animal kingdom, right? Whereas in the Judaic system, it's the human being, it is that you are in the image of God, and therefore you are at a privileged position. So would you like to elaborate on this? In the sense that the relationship that the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Sikhs, this Indic tradition would have with the animal and the plant kingdom. Would you like to elaborate on this?
Sure. I would attempt to do that, sir. So I think the question which has puzzled ever since it has taken hold. Example, they say If you were born, for example, in 1960, where were you in 1959, right? Or maybe 100 years down the line, 50 years down the line, where would you be in 2017? So this question of where we come from, where we go to, and how is life sustained is the enigma which all religions strive to answer and attempt to answer, if I may say. So I think the answer in the Indic religions of Vedanta or Buddhism is that, you see, we are emanating from a universal consciousness. You know, we are a fragment of that. You know, our children, in fact, are not our own children, as Kahlil Gibran famously said. You know, they are an expression of that consciousness of the life force, and you are only the instrument, right? It's a very profound quote which I came across 20 years before. So in Hinduism, Vedanta, and Buddhism, the ultimate key, as I have understood, to enlightenment is to realize that we are all thoroughly interconnected. And the same life force which has brought me into existence has brought all animals, has brought all plants into existence. And in a way, this message is in harmony with the theme of preservation of ecology and environment. And that and in fact, in today's era, there's no better example than a corona, you see, virus wreaking havoc amongst the entire planet. Now, a virus emanating from a nondescript little point of place and time and spreading to the entire space and spreading over last 6 to 8 months or 1 year. And so therefore, the message is of universality. You know, the soul of each one is the same. And we return back to that. And therefore, there's this concept of rebirth as well. In Buddhism, you have these Jataka tales, you know, where Buddha also spoke about, you know, sometimes compassion in the form of a deer which is killed in a forest by a shikari hunter, and so on and so forth. And likewise, so I think that is why there is a high degree of prominence given to, you know, the entire existence in Buddhism and Hinduism, and the concept of oneness. And to change our thinking as to what the actions in our lifetime should be such that they should respect, they should support all life forms. You know, we should not just look at our action as benefiting ourselves individually, which is what we call materialism, but they should transcend that, and they should look at their society, and not just our family, the society, nation, beyond nations, to the world, beyond that, to flora and fauna.
Great, Deepankar. One more question, then I'll open it up. Then Trisha, last question. Then a lot of volunteers are very keen to engage with you. You see, the Silk Road was a very important landmark insofar as, you know, connecting civilizations, connecting trade is concerned. You have a recent example of China wanting to go in for the OBOR, you know, the One Belt, One Road initiative. Do you see it's the same thing, or do you find it as a bit of a disconnect with the old Silk Route, you know, which was more to do with culture than trade, and this is more in terms of assertion of more in the nature of an assertion of a sovereign power trying to extend its reach. Would you like to comment on this?
So as a civil servant, serving civil servant, it might be a bit tough for me to comment on the second part of the question, but I will certainly attempt the first part. I think the Silk Road, let me first of all say that the phrase Silk Road was coined very recently, only in, I think, 19th century, by a German called Ferdinand von Richthofen. And why it was so coined was because silk was the currency of payment, you see, 2,200 years back in time. I think these trade routes were very natural trading routes, and they were mostly passing through Himalayan passes, right, and through the valleys and connecting. And trade and commerce is something which is very integral to civilization. Everybody wants to, you know, the whole concept of barter trade, and so it developed, in my view, as a very natural development process of human evolution, of connecting of societies, you know, through these routes. When the trade commerce started flowing, so did the philosophy, so did religion, because you see, the traders needed spiritual strength to endure the vicissitudes, the vagaries of travels with deserts like Gobi, Taklamakan, at high altitude passes where you get snow blind. So religion followed, culture followed, art followed. I'm not sure if what the OBOR or the current thing that you mentioned is in the same hue. as the original trading routes, and the original routes were not one or two. They were diverse. They were maritime routes. You had communications from India to even Africa, to Southeast Asia, to of course China as well, through the land routes. So it was, I think, fairly multipolar, plurilateral, driven by everybody who had a stake, who could benefit from. It was democratic, therefore it was global in the sense. It had no agenda of anybody except the common, benefit of all concerned. So I think I'll stop there. We can't hear you, sir. You're muted. Dr. Chopra, please.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
So over to you, Trisha, and then we'll open it up to our volunteers. I see a few of them raising their hands, so they'll be getting ready with their questions. So over to you, Trisha, and then we'll open it up to the volunteers. Right?
Sure. I just suggest a few questions. One of the most important reasons why we thought we must publish this book is that it documents so much more in these changing times, especially when today India has the second largest standing army in the world, but it also is the place from which the message of compassion and peace flourished. And we can see that in the book as well. Tell us a little bit, would you like to elaborate a little bit on how the Hindu gods and goddesses take their place in a slightly varied forms in the Buddhist monasteries? Example, Saraswati became Venshu in China. And how did the language of Sanskrit and Nalanda influence the whole gamut of Buddhist scriptures? And then we'll open the floor.
So thank you for asking. So you see, Saraswati, as you mentioned, becomes Benzaite in Japan. And I have seen images of her in a temple in Miyajima. Miyajima is a place which is not far from Hiroshima, where the atomic bomb was dropped. And exactly the same pose, the same Veena, and she is depicted exactly in the same way. In China, in fact, there is a place called Wutai Shan, one of the 4 holy Buddhist places in China, where Manjushri, which is a bit different from Saraswati, is worshipped as Venshu. And you can see Venshu on a sort of a lion, just like Durga. And Manjushri is like, holds a sutra, Prajnaparamitra in one hand, and there's a sword in the other, which is supposed to cut through the veils of Maya. Now, likewise, you see Samanta Bhadra, another bodhisattva in Buddhism, is about, the bodhisattva of truth, of everybody benefiting, so Bhadra, everybody blossoming from the truth, from the philosophy. In China, Samanta Bhadra is called as Puxian. And you can see Puxian's abode in a place called Ermishan. Now, Ermishan is obviously one of those 4 holy places like Char Dhams in India. And this is also in the province of Sichuan, right? And at an altitude of 3,000 meters, you can see Puxian, Samantrabhadra on an elephant, just like Ganesha, with mythical tusks. There are 3 on the side and 3 on the side. Then you have Shiti Garbha, in another bodhisattva, which takes care of those who have deceased during travel and infants and all. Now, Shiti Garbha is called Jizo in Japan. And you see in many of the Japanese Buddhist temples, as well as Shinto shrines, little childlike monks, which is actually Jizo with a red cloth around, right? Now, in China, Shiti Garbha is worshipped in Anhui province, right? So like this, and another beautiful example is Avalokiteshvara, the god for compassion. In China, Avalokiteshvara took a female form, and she's called as Guanyin. And in Japan, she is called Canon. So you see the entire pantheon, of Buddhism traveled, took names she's called Chenrezig in Tibet, you see. So these linkages are very beautiful, can be seen and admired today. Thank you. Trisha, does that answer your question?
Yes, of course. I'll come back to the last question after everybody's asked their question.
Trisha, you continue. There's a little problem here. I mean, in the sense that the volunteers, this time we try to do more technology. That is, there's one group which is meant only for us, and there's one group which is meant for the volunteers. So some of you have not been able to link that up. So you continue with the question, and I'm taking the question in the chat box, and I'll ask him those questions, right?
Okay. So there is before the last question, I have a few more questions. Let me know if that has been answered.
Sure.
The question is about the immense popularity of Buddhism. I think it's partly being answered already in China and Japan. And why, despite being born in India, it is
Sorry,
it is
popularity
still,
of your voice.
sorry?
Popularity of.
Okay, the popularity of Buddhism in China and Japan and Korea and all the other places. I think you've not discussed much about Korea, and I think I would like you to pay a little more, give a little more instances from that area as well, because there are some very amazing stories in that part as well. And yeah, about that. So, why is it so popular there? How is it so popular there?
So I think, yes, you rightly mentioned it's not just China. In Korea, in fact, there are, let me just quickly illustrate that before answering your question. You have a famous, mountainous region called Gaesan in Korea. And in the lap of these mountains is located a very interesting World Heritage Site. It's called Haensa. It's a temple, Buddhist temple, come WHS. And in this site, you have for last 900 years, the world's oldest book printed on wood, preserved. And this book is nothing but Prajna Paramita Sutra. And it is written on 84,000 blocks of wood. Each block is about 2 feet long, 1 feet wide, and about a few inches big. And, the amazing thing when I did a night stay at this temple was that Gaesan, I thought, was a very Korean sounding name, Gaesan or something. But it turns out that it is named after Gaya, you see, and San in Japan also means hills. And there are many other examples, in Seoul, you have the Jogesa temple, which is the leading temple in Korea, which belongs to the Joge or the Zen Buddhism or the Chan Buddhism. And likewise in Japan. So I think the reason why it spread was, as I mentioned partly before, that the philosophy is about universalism, about any and everybody can attain enlightenment. So it's democratic, egalitarian. It does not believe much in rituals, if I may say. It is very scientific in its approach. Beautiful example is Zen Buddhism. You don't need to even read any scripture, any sutra, any rituals. No, you just meditate and you observe, be a witness, to your surroundings. And by merely doing that, which is what, Dhammo or Bodhidharma did, you can achieve enlightenment, right? So I think it is because of these pluses, these virtues of the philosophy that it spread so widely. And also another observation would be in Japan, if you see the religion existing before, was Shinto, which still is prevalent today. Now Shinto is more of nature worship. So I think the philosophy which Buddhism offered was fairly well developed, and there were a lot of debates. It's not that it was accepted because of some sort of a political dominance or it's being usurped on other civilizations. So I think that's why it became universally, especially in the Asian continent, so much respected and valued. And of course, there was beautiful art moving along with it. And beautiful paintings, frescoes, grottos. That's probably the reason you see.
We have a volunteer, Muskan, and she wants to know about the concept of suffering and how the suffering of Buddha, the suffering of Jesus, does that reflect something? Is there a commonality? Because that's a different take on realization. That is, whether you realize the ultimate through your own suffering,
Yes, sure. I think it's an interesting point. You see, the 4 basic truths of Buddhism, they are, that there is suffering in the world and there is a reason for this suffering. The third, that this suffering can be cured. There is a solution as well. And the fourth and the last is that the solution is the Eightfold Path. The right thought, right speech, right action, right conduct, right amount of meditation, right livelihood, right amount of compassion, right effort. So suffering is universal to mankind. So Jesus Christ trying to bring a new philosophy over what was prevalent, the Judaism, and in the process being inflicted upon, right? So all religions, I think, try to answer the question of as we discussed before, that what is that higher governing spirit which has produced us and sent us to this planet. And the concept of suffering is very common, in Hinduism also. They say you will get mukti only when you attain nirvana. So life with all its joys has a bit of a suffering. But if you understand the reasons, that this is nature, this is transformation with time, which is bound to happen, that you are bound to return to the consciousness from which you came, I think then the suffering ceases to be suffering. And I think that is the message of Buddhism.
Okay, great. We have another question from Ashish Sood, who wants to know about the future Buddha Maitreya.
Yes. Thank you, Ashish, for asking that. Well, in religions, always interesting things come up, to give peace, solace, and hope. So Maitreya Buddha is often depicted in Ladakh in temples, the future Buddha. So there's the concept of Trinity, the past Buddha, the current Buddha, the future Buddha, or there are other variations like the medicine Buddha, and so on. So future Buddha, as per the mythology, the Buddhist mythology, is somebody who would come in future to sort of bring salvation to all of us. So that is what it means.
Okay, great. Now we have a series of questions. Jyoti Dhawan wants to know that Buddhism waned in India because of the revival of Hinduism. And what do you think is the reason for China turning away from Buddhism? And this is not just, if I could elaborate, not just when Mao came in, but even before the communist revolution, Buddhism was on the wane in China also. So would you like to react to this?
Yes, most certainly. I'll take the second question first of Jyoti. You see, in China, no doubt, it's a very good question. I'm glad you've asked. It's not that the Buddhism waned away with the coming of communism only for the first time. In fact, the history of China has had persecutions of Buddhism even before. And I'll give you one very famous example. In the most flourishing dynasty of China, as I mentioned, the Tang dynasty, which was there roughly between 600 to 900 AD, while many emperors and empresses, and there was in fact one empress, Wu Zetian, who all famously patronized Buddhism, there was one emperor who persecuted Buddhism. And they went around destroying all the monasteries, and the entire architecture landscape of Buddhism was more heavily persecuted, as I understand, than even the Cultural Revolution of 1960s. And yet, this also brings us back to Dr. Chopra's first opening question. And yet each time Buddhism has sprung back in China. You see, the Songs patronized it, the Yuan dynasty, which was established by Kublai Khan, who came from Mongolia, the grandson of the famous Genghis Khan, he patronized Buddhism. The Mings patronized Buddhism. The Qings, the Manchus, they again patronized Buddhism. So I think every attempt to persecute it has only resulted in it springing back with double force. Because eventually at the heart of citizens of China, I strongly feel, and at other places where Buddhism is still prevalent, the philosophy is so very powerful that it cannot just be erased by a year or a decade or a few decades of turmoil of any kind, which has especially come from outside. Because religion at the end of the day is a personal matter. It's an individual phenomena. And I recommend another beautiful book by Sun Shu Yun, 10,000 Miles Without a Cloud. If you wish to dwell more on the subject, she traces Zhuangzang's journey, and she comes from a Communist Party background. She's an offspring, and she answers some of these questions. Coming to your first question, in India, I think a lot of Buddhist principles were absorbed in the reformed form of Hinduism, which Shankaracharya brought in the 8th century. And for example, you see, there was a practice of Bali, sacrifice of animals in Hindu temples, something which you can even see today in Nepal, in one of the temples in Chitwan, Manokamna, and also Kamakhya in Assam, right? But these are exceptions, but this was I believe, the norm before. So the concept of non-violence or not inflicting injury to the all life forms, flora, fauna, was then heavily absorbed into Hinduism, so in that sense, there's little to distinguish from the reformed Hinduism, the Vedantic concept, and Buddhism, right? So that's the reason I feel, and of course we had the attacks from, the Delhi Sultanate and, the Lodhis, the Khiljis, the slave dynasty, and then the Mughals. So in the second millennium, much of our institutional memory, our scriptures, our philosophy went from Nalanda to Tibet after the attack of Bakhtiyar Khilji in 1193. In fact, Dalai Lama, His Holiness Dalai Lama famously said that, we were your students before, and now you are our students, because everything moved to Tibet. And it is not a coincidence. I'll just add one last remark, Sandra. Not a coincidence that in the second millennium, the Chinese kings and dynasties have, in fact, heavily patronized the Tibetan form of Buddhism. So you see the Qings, the last dynasty from 17th to early 20th till 1911. They established things like Lama Temple in Beijing, and they invited the previous Dalai Lamas to counsel them to sort of, they were the state guests. So they moved for Buddhist connect between China, moved more towards Tibet in the latter half of the second millennium. I'll stop
Great.
there.
Now, Deepankar, I'm going to read you all the questions and you can take your time responding to some of them because we have to close at 4. Now, the first question is from, there is a very significant question from Mamon Zera. She says that from your account, we understand that Buddhism was able to spread impressively in East Asia and even Japan, despite the geographical disconnect. What might have been the problem with the Arabian Peninsula? Why was it that Buddhism could make no impact on the Arabian Peninsula or Western Europe or other parts which were more accessible? Then, of course, there's another question by Satish Akant, which you have roughly answered, which says that has Hinduism appropriated Buddha by calling him an avatar? And Keshav would like to know something about the role of Nagarjuna and his background before he went to China. So I think, and Ashish has asked yet another question about Buddhism in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and whether this is recognized. So we want to freeze the questions here. So you have these 3 questions. You can comment on that. You've got about 12 minutes, 10 minutes, because then we'll take 2 minutes to thank you, and Trisha and Business World would also like to say something. Right.
Sure. I'll try and do justice to all the questions. So to begin with, the first question about why Buddhism didn't spread as much or is not seen today as much in the Arabian Peninsula and Europe is a very interesting question, and thank you for asking this. The fact of the matter is that 2000 years back in time, in fact, Buddhism did indeed spread very strongly to northwestern India and into Central Asia and even into the Middle East, and it went right up to, as I understand, Egypt and even Greece, you see. To illustrate this, you see the Gandhara, the very depiction of Buddha starts roughly around 100 200 BC, which is 400 years after Buddha's demise. So as I mentioned before, Buddha always said, don't worship me. You find your own truth. You find your own way of achieving enlightenment, right? So, but because it spread in that direction, and let's take a quick look at what was a dynasty. We had the Bactrian kingdom, which was a Greco-Indian kingdom, which was ruling in Afghanistan and parts of eastern parts of Persia. So even in countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these were Buddhists. Now, recall the Bamyan Buddhas, the 2 world's highest rock-cut statues of Buddha. It's only after they were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001 that, the Dafo Buddha of Sichuan, as I mentioned, is now the world's highest Buddha. They were Persian monks who visited China, Buddhist monks from Persia. This is well recorded. I've seen with my own eyes in places like Dunhuang in China, right? I understand, I've not traveled to Greece, but I understand there's an island and there are these caves in a particular island, parts of Greece, where the Buddhist monks have meditated. So the reason why it didn't sustain is again very interesting, because that Middle Eastern region has been a region of a lot of conflicts. So I think when Zoroastrianism was there and at the time of birth of Islam, you had Zoroastrianism, you had Christianity, you had Buddhism, you had all these influences very strongly in this region, which led to a lot of conflict. And I think the genesis of Islam probably lies in those kind of conflicts. As they say that Prophet Muhammad was a part of a trading tribe and the trade was getting completely disrupted. So he said, why there's idol worshipping and images worshipping? So stop all that. To put it very simply, I think Peter Frankopan has tried to do justice to this in his book called The Silk Roads. Coming to the second question now, Hinduism, in its reformed version, took Buddhism, and Buddha is one of the avatars. I think vice versa also happened. So if you enter a Buddhist temple, you will find, Indra, Mihira, and so on as a part of the bodhisattvas who are supporting the Buddha. So another example of this is in Hong Kong, the Tian Buddha I mentioned. You know, the 12 Chinese zodiac signs which are associated with an animal each are actually associated with these gods and goddesses like Indra, Mehra. You can see their statues and you can see the corresponding animal sign. You know, I've mentioned this in my piece on Hong Kong. So I think the two have been intertwined completely. Now, coming to the third question, Nagarjuna. I mean, Nagarjuna, I would not be able to talk at length, but he was certainly a very phenomenal monk based in Nalanda, in the likes of Santa Rakshita. And a lot of these monks from Nalanda were the ones who went to Tibet. You know, people like Atish Deepankar Aron, you know, Guru Padma Sambhava. So they have definitely, influenced Buddhism in a major way. They, of course, went to China as well. They went to Tibet as well. So coming to the fourth question, you know, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, thanks for asking that. I noticed, and I write this in different places in the book, in this book, that the temples, Buddhist temples, there's a difference in these temples and the temples you see in mainland China or the temples you see in Korea and Japan also. Like Taiwan, Hong Kong, there's a frantic activity. You find a lot of youth, you find a strong religious fervor, you find lots of incense sticks, you find, in fact, in Taiwan, they have the yin and yang. So, you know, there are these two little fish like stones and they throw them. And if one surface is curved, one is flat. So if both the curved ones remain on the top after the stones falling, it means yes. And if there is uneven falling, then it means no. So that's a bit of a superstition, I would say. But basically, the temples are very vibrant and full of life. And there are lots of them in Taiwan, Hong Kong, which can be admired today. Great. I hope I've been able to do justice to the four questions.
Yeah, you have. In fact, you know, there are two very interesting questions which I can't, and we may have to search it for time. Devi Dash wants to know whether this book can help in improving the currently tense situation between China and India. And there's another question which is not directly related, but which says, you know, that while in India Buddhism and Jainism spread, was it that Jainism could not strike any root anywhere outside the area that it emanated from? That's a question. There are two questions which are there, and this one, the second one, has been asked by Ritika.
All right. Thank you very much. Dash sir was my former Director General of Revenue Intelligence. It's a pleasure to have him here. I think the answer to your question in one word is most certainly yes. I think if we look at the history, the kind of cultural connect, the closeness of the two civilizations, something which Dr. Sanjeev Chopra started the session with, it is far too enormous, far too strong, far too linked and intertwined than the current scenario may want to suggest. So I think it's important for us to, because this is not a history which is lying only in a piece of book or relegated to some sutras or scriptures buried in a cupboard, or like the cave number 16 in Dunhuang, where suddenly in early 20th century a lot of frescoes were discovered. This is a living history. You know, this is something which has affected the culture, the ethos, the thinking of the people who constitute these two civilizations. So I think the message in the book has a strong connect with what is happening today in terms of its potential to make the civilizations realize that, you know, this current phenomena should only be a passing disturbance, which should soon be changed to the stable relationship of peace, of friendliness, of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which has happily existed and coexisted. Sure. Coming to the second question, Jainism, why it didn't spread? Now that's a difficult one for me to answer because I haven't studied Jainism in that extent and detail. But I will briefly attempt one clue or answer to that question. Now, it's very interesting to see the moment Buddha attained enlightenment. What is the first thing he did, if I may ask? After he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Gaya, the first thing he did was he went back to 5 disciples who had turned him down when he had accepted the offering from Sujata, when he was otherwise meditating alone in a forest and had become emaciated. And he realized that religion, enlightenment cannot be about relegating, about leaving everything and retiring into a forest and, that absolving himself of all the material pursuits of the duties and actions. So Sujata's offering, he accepts, and then he famously talks about the middle path after attaining enlightenment. So his 5 disciples, who later became strong disciples, they didn't like the fact that he accepted the offering and that he renounced the spiritual life in the forest. So after attaining enlightenment, he first addressed them, and that is called the first sermon of Buddha. It is depicted in paintings in various places, including, I've tried to capture it in the book as well, in Dunhuang. In other words, Buddha went around marketing his philosophy. He was not happy to be only aware of what he had discovered in the course of his meditation and enlightenment process. He wanted to share it with the mankind. And he went around, I would say, aggressively, starting with those 5 monks, and then you see Ashoka and other emissaries, the concept of Sangha, people moving out and spreading the message. So I think the clue to why Jainism didn't spread as much as Buddhism may perhaps lie in as simple a word as marketing.
Okay.
Assuming the philosophies are equally powerful, and I'm not commenting on the philosophical differences.
Right. No, I think you made the point, and therefore my next question is, Trisha, in the interest of all that we've discussed, I'm going to translate this book into Chinese. Do you think that there'll be a market for this book if it was translated in Chinese?
There is a huge market. In fact, we've got a lot of interest in the Chinese publishing space. We actually have an agent in China for a lot of our books. Yes, I've got approximately 16 publishers who have asked to see the book. So it's in process, and hopefully we'll get a deal soon. So let's hope for the best. And I think there's a huge market there.
Wonderful, and I think this conversation will also perhaps lead to this very fantastic journey. And if we could actually get this book translated and marketed in Taiwan and China and Hong Kong, it will be really very good. Much as we would have wanted to continue and move on, and get more questions, there is the restriction of time, and therefore on behalf of the CSOI and Mamta Kundra, who's an executive committee member, she's here with us, and she's asked me to especially thank both Deepankar Aron and Trisha Niyogi for an absolutely fantastic conversation. Also, I'd like to thank you both on behalf of Business World, Ruhail and Anurag Batra. Anurag has not been able to join us today, but he sent us his best compliments and greetings. And from all my WOW volunteers and the CSOI members, thank you very much. It was indeed a wonderful conversation, and we hope to have many more conversations with you in times to come. Thank you very much, friends. And also to announce that next episode will be on the 1st of November instead of the last Saturday of October, because that happens to be a Dussehra. And the book that we'll most probably be taking up would be Footsteps in the Sands of Time by Rajiv Ratan Shah. With this, let me sign off from this very interesting episode. Thank you very much. Good day. Have a nice month ahead, and look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all those participants and to the organizers, to Dr. Chopra. Thank you, CSOI.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you, everyone.